When their business is failing, most founders look in all the wrong places to try and fix it. You know, they obsess over their messaging and their marketing, they tweak their product, they try and hire rock star salespeople, and they do all of these textbook moves, they pull all of these obvious levers, and you know what? None of it works. Because the fact is, they are ignoring the real reason that things are breaking. It's the hidden factor which actually makes all of that other stuff work in any business. This is the thing that I figured out right here in my own growth journey to becoming one of the world's leading voices in strategy. That's what it looks like when you actually crack it. And today I'm going to show you what that thing is. First, I'll explain to you why the normal solutions don't work, or at least don't work as well as they should. And then I'll show you what you need to fix instead. And finally, I'll tell you how. So make sure you stick around for the end because that is the gold. Look, if you're running a business that isn't growing aggressively, you need to know this because I guarantee if you don't have that aggressive growth, it's because you don't have this thing figured out. Now look, to illustrate the mistake that most businesses make when they deal with the symptoms of their problem rather than the root cause, let me tell you a story. It's a story about the time that I saw Donald Miller speak at a conference. And if you don't know who Donald Miller is, he came up with this concept called story brand, which is basically where you do the messaging for your business in the framework of a story. And let me say up front, it is absolutely fantastic. I would recommend it to anyone. It's a great way to make what your business does be super clear and pretty compelling too. Okay, but what happened in this conference is he gave people this little framework to write out what their business did, which was essentially a problem solution end state framework. And he invited people to then stand up and share what they had written. And let me tell you, oh my goodness, people just went nuts for this. This was more like a Justin Bieber concert than it was like a business conference, okay? Because most of these businesses, they had never had a clear way to describe what their business does until this very moment. And you know, that is an intoxicating drug. And so many of these businesses, quite understandably, they thought, wow, now that I've got this incredible bit of messaging, everything's gonna change for my business. The thing's just gonna fly. But unfortunately, I think that they're wrong. Because I was sitting there and I was listening to these businesses explain what they did using Donald Miller's framework. And although the explanations were beautiful and really good, they all had a massive fatal flaw, which is that all they really did was explain not what that particular business does, but what any business in their category did. You know, the pool cleaning company came up with a beautiful story for every single pool cleaner in the world. The insurance salesman came up with a beautiful story for every single insurance salesman in the world. The accountant came up with a story that could apply to every single accountant in the world. And ultimately, if they went back and implemented these things, sure, things would be a bit more tidy in their business, but it was ultimately going to leave them in the same place because at the end of the day, there's still no real reason why people were going to pick them over the next guy in their category. Now, I just want to be very, very clear. This is not Donald Miller's fault at all, because at the end of the day, he's just dealing with doing great messaging. And sure enough, this was great messaging. He's not responsible for this root cause, this hidden factor that all of these businesses needed to address before moving on to their messaging and their marketing and everything else. So, what is that thing? Well, I'll tell you. The answer is leverage. Leverage is the hidden factor that these businesses were missing. It's the hidden factor that almost all businesses are missing. It is the thing that enables some businesses to fly despite having mediocre messaging, marketing, product, etc. And other businesses who nail all of that stuff to a world-class level continue to struggle. Now, to understand it, it's very, very simple, okay? I want you to imagine if your business was selling bottled water to people who are dying of thirst in the desert. How difficult would it be to run that business? Do you think that that business would need to have amazing messaging, marketing, sales, HR, admin, culture? Do you think that business would need to be competent at any of the general sort of stuff of business that we normally think is important? The answer, of course, is no, because clearly if everyone's dying of thirst in the desert and you're the only person selling water, then, well, things are going to be pretty easy for you no matter what you do. This is an example of a high leverage business. And although it's a very extreme example, this is what every business on the planet needs to be aiming towards. And the success of any given business is largely going to be determined by how close it gets to that water in the desert analogy. Now, the way we break this down is simply through a supply and demand concept. What that water in the desert company has on its hands is essentially a business with incredibly high demand because it's water in the desert. People are dying of thirst. They really want that water. But also, just as importantly, very, very low supply. It's the desert. There is no water and you're the only one selling it. When you get this intoxicating combination of high demand and low supply, that's when a business starts growing. That's when it gets rocket fuel in it. Even if you get a lot of the tactical operational stuff wrong, you are still going to do well. To create leverage is simply an exercise of raising the demand of what you're selling as high as possible while simultaneously lowering the supply, making sure that you are the only one selling it. Now, most businesses, they have an issue with one of these two things, supply and demand. The majority have high demand, but also high supply, which in other words means that they're selling something that people want, but unfortunately, people can get it from loads of other places. So this essentially is like you are selling the water in the desert. Okay, good, because people want the water. But unfortunately, there are 100 other people also selling water in the desert. So there is high supply. In that scenario, you have completely lost your leverage. And this is a situation that I think that 70-80% of businesses are in. 70 or 80% of businesses basically operate in established categories where there's high demand for what they're selling, whether it's funeral care or cereal or socks or legal services or anything like that. So they've got the demand, but unfortunately there are loads of other options, so there's high supply, and therefore it's very hard for those businesses to cut through and win business. These type of businesses, what do they have to do? Well, basically they normally have to end up competing on price. They have to sort of destroy their margins. They have to try and maybe undercut the other guy with a quote, maybe spend more money on marketing than other people just to try and edge ahead of the competitive pack. Now, some other businesses, they kind of have the opposite problem. Some other businesses are doing something which is very unique, so they've actually nailed the supply side of things because there's low supply because they're the only one doing what they're doing, so that's good. But unfortunately, there's a reason that there's low supply, which is because nobody wants this thing. This is what I call the vegan dog food problem. I've had many founders come up to me knowing that I sort of preach the idea of selling something that people can't get elsewhere. And they say to me, oh, Alex, yeah, I've got this completely nailed because, we are the only vegan dog food company on the market. And I'm like, well, you haven't really got it nailed. The reason you're the only vegan dog food company on the market is because there's no demand for vegan dog food. Nobody wants to buy it. So these businesses who have got low supply, but also, which is good, but also low demand, which is bad, they have a whole different set of issues. Either they just can't find people who are interested in what they're buying, or sometimes it's also a confusion thing. Because they're doing something that is quite unique and unusual and new, innovative maybe, customers don't really understand what it is, they don't really understand why they would want it, and so these businesses, they also struggle. These businesses also have low leverage. Finding an idea that nails both sides of the equation, well, that's beta, right? And this is what business strategy is all about. It is all about getting as close as we can to that optimal point of leverage, that point of very high demand, but very low supply of what we're selling. All businesses are on a continuum to get there. And the closer that you get to that hallowed, high leverage, water in the desert position, the easier it's going to be to make money and the better all the other parts of your business are going to work. So the next question is, how do we do it, right? Because to be honest, it is super tricky because these days, most of the low-hanging fruit has frankly been picked. Look, if there was something in your category which your customers obviously wanted, were crying out for, and nobody was giving it to them, well, people would answer that demand, right? That opportunity wouldn't be sitting around very long. And the fact is, it's incredibly rare to get a slam dunk open goal like this where you can just go and give people that thing. Like, most needs have fundamentally been answered, or if they haven't been answered, that's probably because they're almost impossible to answer. So The only thing that you can do really is get creative. Look, I've actually made an entire strategic toolkit which gives you 20 systems to nail this stuff, and you can get it free via the link in the description. But look, right here, right now, let's just focus on one. Now, the key thing here is instead of doing what everyone else is doing, which is asking your customers what they want and then trying to come up with an original solution to give it to them, you actually need to flip things, right? Instead, you actually start with an original solution and then you ask if the customer would want it. The reason this works is because it enables you to dig out problems and desires which customers never knew they had and which they would never verbalize to you. And therefore, it's open white space in the market, because if your competitors aren't hearing what these problems are because the customers aren't articulating them, then of course, they're not going to answer them. But if you can come up with a unique solution which then reveals that problem, then suddenly you are going to be in that high demand, low supply state. You're going to be in that high leverage state. Now, a great way to do this is with an exercise that I've come up with I call the 3 Ds, which are disagreement, difference, and duplication. Each D in this model represents a powerful way of generating new, unique angles in your category, which you can then take and ask, what problem might this solve for customers? And then, hey presto, with this, you start to come up with these more creative forms of value that your competitors have missed. The first D, disagreement, is all about looking inside yourself, at your own opinions, at your own life experience, at your own point of view, and then seeing in what way you personally disagree with the status quo of your category. Look, every category of goods out there, it's got problems, it's got norms, it's got things that don't work about it very well, it's got sort of patterns which everyone in that category just adheres to, like they're on rails, without really ever questioning whether this is the best way or the right way to do things. Disagreement comes from you simply saying, you know what, I actually don't agree with that. I actually think that things should be done in this other way, and then you start to come up with a new territory for creating value. You know, a classic example of a disagreement-based business was what Steve Jobs did with Apple, because obviously back in the 80s and 90s, computers, they were very technical. They had no sort of artistic or humanistic creative flair to them. Jobs, on the other hand, unlike other kind of computer people at the time, he had done calligraphy in college and he was really into all of the more sort of like soft humanities side of things. And so he wanted to make a computer which was also beautiful and artistic and creative, as well as being this kind of rational processing device. And that is obviously where he then took a different stance to the other companies in his category, and he created these incredibly unique, never before seen products, like for example the original iMac back in 1999, which was unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. So you see how his disagreement produced this original form of solution. And then the question was, okay, what problem does that actually solve for the customers? Just because you do something different, it doesn't necessarily mean that customers are going to want it. But in the case of Apple, by softening computing and adding in this artistic element, he basically made it far more appealing and accessible to people who up until that point hadn't been interested in computers. Boom. From his disagreement, from his unique personal point of view, came this massive creation of new value. The next D is difference. And what this means is simply looking at your business as it is today and making a list of every way you are currently different from the majority of your competitors. And the key point here is that these shouldn't just be differences that you intended or that you tried to build. You need to look for the differences that you've never even noticed before, or differences that are actually maybe weaknesses which you've actually thought may be negative, or just differences that were completely accidental, completely random, and you just haven't really ever sort of bothered to notice. When you've got all of these differences, you then have, with each one of them, a potential form of leverage. All you have to do with each difference is you then have to ask, is there a way that this difference, this weakness, this kind of like gap in our business might actually give value to a customer? So a great example of this is what Nintendo did with the Nintendo Switch. The Nintendo Switch is basically by far the least powerful console in the console wars. PlayStation and Xbox, they've spent years fighting over who's got the best graphics, the best processing power, the best online gaming experience, etc. Nintendo, they could never match up to that power. So what they did instead is they asked, well, okay, how could a more low-powered machine actually create new value that those high-powered machines couldn't? And what they discovered, of course, is that you could make the machine smaller, therefore you could make it portable, and you could basically own a whole new world of gaming, the sort of party gaming space, which PlayStation and Xbox aren't really about. And this actually led the Switch to become the world's #1 console. But it all came out of exploiting an inbuilt difference in what they do, an inbuilt difference in their product. And then the final D is duplication. And when I say duplication, what I mean here is duplicating a value offering from another completely unrelated category and bringing it into your category. So an example I love of this is the cosmetics brand in the UK, Lush, who are phenomenally successful, really creative business. And essentially what they did is they looked to the world of fresh fruit and veg. And they thought, okay, what value offerings are common in fruit and veg, but which you won't find in cosmetics? And the thing that they settled upon was freshness. Obviously you want your produce to be fresh, but people don't really think about freshness in the world of cosmetics. But Lush did, and they started to make fresh, handmade cosmetics, as they call it. And not only that, in order to communicate this clearly to customers, they copied all of these different codes from the world of fruit and veg, and they put them into their stores, like chalkboards and like crates and all these colorful displays and stuff like that. It really feels like you're walking onto a sort of produce aisle when you go into a Lush store. So you see, again, they just did this by taking something that was common in another category and bringing it into a category where it didn't already exist. In each case, what you can see is that these businesses produce something with low supply and high demand. And in each case, they made hundreds of millions, or frankly, billions of dollars. So look, if you want to master strategic thinking like this and just get total clarity on how your business is going to get leverage, then make sure you grab my free strategy toolkit in the description below. And when you've got this idea, you're also going to want to write this out in a killer strategy document that anyone can use and understand. And in this video right here, I will show you exactly how. And of course, if you want more no BS strategy gold like this to level up your thinking, then you know what you need to do. Please subscribe.